His face is recognized all over the world. To many, Ernesto Che Guevara is the ultimate symbol of rebellion, a heroic champion who fought for the poor. But ask the thousands of Cubans who fled the country he helped conquer, and you hear a very different story. To them, he is a ruthless warlord who left behind a legacy of repression and totalitarian control. How did one young medical student become both a saintly champion of the oppressed and a murderous monster? And can those two legacies ever really be separated? In the early 1950s, Che left behind a privileged life in Argentina to travel across rural Latin America. As a medical student, he expected to treat illnesses, but instead he witnessed a level of systemic poverty and misery that medicine alone couldn't cure. Latin America at the time was largely controlled by brutal oligarchies. Wealth was concentrated at the very top, while American corporations bought up vast tracts of land originally belonging to indigenous people. They used it for profit and export, frequently leaving huge portions uncultivated, while the local populations literally starved. In 1953, Che traveled to Guatemala. He watched as democratically elected President Jacobo Arbenz passed reforms to buy back some of that uncultivated land and redistribute it to the people. But Arbenz's land reforms threatened foreign corporate profits. Soon after, he was overthrown in a CIA-sponsored military coup, driven by the desire to protect private property and fueled by fears of a communist takeover. Che watched the Guatemalan government collapse, and he took a definitive lesson away from the wreckage. Peaceful reform would always be crushed by corporate and imperial power. To his mind, violent revolution was now the only viable cure. He carried that conviction to Mexico, where he met a group of exiled Cuban revolutionaries. There, Che decided to help a young Fidel Castro build a guerrilla army to liberate Cuba. Their target was Fulgencio Batista, a brutal tyrant who seized power in a US-backed military coup. Under him, Havana became a luxurious playground for foreign investors. Meanwhile, most Cubans were mired in deep poverty, with dissent met by violent crackdowns. The guerrilla campaign worked. In 1959, Castro's forces successfully overthrew the regime to massive popular support, with cheering crowds filling the streets to welcome the end of Batista's rule. Che wasted no time implementing his ideals. He oversaw large-scale land redistribution, helped peasants build rural health clinics, and organized volunteer literacy brigades that ultimately raised Cuba's literacy rate to a staggering 96%. As a commander, his harsh military discipline rapidly morphed into a reign of terror across the Cuban countryside. As soon as the new regime took power, they enacted what they called revolutionary justice. Che oversaw the mass executions of hundreds of suspected spies, Batista officials, and collaborators, killing them without anything resembling a fair trial. The violence didn't stop with the immediate aftermath. Guevara helped establish the structures of a totalitarian state, complete with arbitrary arrests, forced labor camps, the total suppression of press freedom, and the severe repression of LGBT people. The resulting atmosphere of fear forced countless Cubans to risk their lives fleeing the island, often leaving with nothing but the clothes on their backs. This chart shows the catastrophic economic toll of Che's absolute ideological certainty. As finance minister, he replaced worker pay raises with moral certificates, believing ideology alone would motivate labor. Productivity immediately collapsed. His militant aggression extended far beyond Cuba's borders. It was Che who urged Castro to host Soviet nuclear weapons on the island, a decision that brought the entire globe to the brink of nuclear destruction. In his absolute certainty that he was curing the disease of imperialism, Che Guevara built a new, inescapable cage for the Cuban people. Che was ultimately a militant, not a bureaucrat. Recognizing this, he left his government posts to export his brand of violent revolution abroad, first meeting failure in the Congo. He then traveled to Bolivia, where government forces, heavily assisted by the CIA, finally captured and executed him in 1967. His physical life ended in that Bolivian jungle, but his myth immediately took off. Over the decades, a complex, wildly contradictory life was flattened out and commodified into a trendy symbol of rebellion. Looking closely at Che Guevara's historical ledger forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. Can the pursuit of a more just world ever justify the mechanics of absolute terror?